Let me start off by saying my son, Adam, is 22 years old. Back when my ex-wife, Tori, and I were trying for kids, we found out that I was infertile. We decided we'd adopt, then about 4 months later my ex-wife is pregnant. I was thrilled because I thought maybe the doctor made a mistake. No, I was wrong. My ex-wife cheated on me and I didn't find out until 20 years later. Tori told me 2 years ago that she cheated on me. And we did a paternity test to make sure, and well, he's not my biological son. My ex and I divorced a few weeks later. Ever since my son found out the truth, he wanted to meet his biological father. He did, and they started to become really close. It hurt me much more than I thought it would. He's an adult, he can make his own decisions, but it hurt really bad. They started to bond really well, and all of a sudden Adam became really distant from me. It's been like this for almost a year and a half. I tried to text him to make plans for dinner and he said he's busy with Chris, biological father. I tried numerous times to connect with him by calling and texting, but he never made plans aside from like a meal every other month. We used to do stuff every other week, but it's been completely different since he found out about Chris. I couldn't stand it. My son, who I raised since he was a baby, treated me like I didn't matter. Anytime we'd actually have plans, he would still be cold and distant. What I mean by that is became much more defensive of his personal life. I'd ask him how classes or friends were and he'd just say they were fine but never go deeper than that. He also changed his major from econ to computer science and didn't even mention it to me until a year later. I told him how much he was hurting me because of how distant he was and he apologized and said he'd do better. He never did. I told him numerous times and he never changed. He was still distant. What was the final straw for me was the phone conversation I had with him last week. He said he was going to change his last name to Chris because he liked it so much and because they were close. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told him this. I can't believe you are going to do this. That's really disappointing to me. If you decide to change your last name, go ahead, but if you do that, then I'm no longer your father and I don't want to be involved in your life. He hung up on me. I didn't even bother reaching out because I know he wouldn't respond. I stand by what I said. I meant every word and still do. The last name change to me means he no longer views me as a father and views Chris as his, despite the fact he's 22. My family told me I'm being unreasonable, meanwhile my best friends think it's reasonable. After I found out about Chris, I took a couple of days and didn't speak to my ex-wife or Adam. They didn't contact me. I didn't contact them. I needed a break. A lot of you are asking for a deeper meaning behind this, and I think I finally figured out why he's been so cold. A few months before my wife told us the truth, we were in a very long argument. His grandma, my mother, left a big inheritance for him that I am fully in charge of. Enough to pay for college and have enough wiggle room to not stress all the time about it. After a semester of university, he started dating this girl. He was head over heels in love with her. I never met the girl, so I have zero clue how she felt about the relationship. Suddenly, after a few months of dating, Adam asked me for about $3,000 to be deposited into his account from the inheritance. I already paid for the semester, so this was odd to me. I asked Adam why he needed the money. He said his girlfriend was having trouble paying for her tuition and asked my son to help. I told him no because it seemed to me that she was treating him like a piggy bank. He spent over $1,000 on her in just under a few months. He would constantly talk about how he loved going shopping with her so he could buy her things. To me, she was just after my son's inheritance, and I was right. What I said to him was basically this: Adam, you haven't been dating this girl for very long at all, and for me to give you that much money just to spend on her after a few months doesn't sit well with me. That's the money your grandmother left you for your college career, not hers. If you two were more serious, then I would think about it, but I'm not giving you that much money to just give your girlfriend. Turns out my guess was right, and she was after his money. They broke up shortly after and have had an on-again, off-again relationship ever since. He was upset with me, but he eventually got over it after a few months. Then we found out about my ex's affair. I don't know if that's the real reason he's so cold. That was a huge argument that went on for weeks until she left him. I got my son a $7,000 motorcycle for his 18th birthday this past June. My son is obsessed with automobile and loves motorcycles. In his room he has plenty of models and posters of motorcycles of all types. His bio dad passed away when he was just 12, now I'm married to my current husband and he has kids of his own. My husband has always been against my son's interest in motorcycles. He thinks I'm encouraging him to be reckless, distracting him from school and by extension his future, and spoiling him and blowing away money by spending $7,000 on a motorcycle. This caused some tension between him and my son, so I told him to stop complaining about it. Around 2 weeks ago, my son's motorcycle went missing. We opened a police report but nothing came out of it. It just disappeared. My husband had a smirk on his face the entire time, just walking around saying, "I told you so. You just wasted your money." This was unbearable to hear, to be quite honest. My mother-in-law visited few days ago. She was talking about the other house my husband owns and mentioned seeing a motorcycle. One that's similar to the one that we lost in my husband's carriage while she was cleaning it. She goes to clean that house weekly even though it's empty. My husband plans on giving it to his kids as inheritance. I was puzzled. I asked if she was certain, but she showed me a photo she took of it which confirmed that it was indeed my son's motorcycle. I immediately rushed to call my husband and confront him about it. He admitted that he took and hid the motorcycle in his garage as a last resort after me and his stepson kept brushing him and his thoughts off about the $7,000 being spent on something unnecessary and that could cause issues. I blew up at him demanding he return it. He refused and told me he had been considering selling it and giving the money back to me so I could use it wisely this time. I told him I was serious and that I'd call the police. He literally said, "This is a family matter and cops can't do shit about it." I had enough. I called the cops soon as I ended the call with him. The motorcycle was found and returned. But my husband had to be taken in since there was an open file about the motorcycles going missing. He was let go eventually, but he was livid with me. He came home yelling about how awful what I did was and how crazy my behavior was. I refused to engage in the argument, but he told his entire family about it and they judged me for calling the police on my own husband, even though I already asked him to return it. He said he was just looking out for my son and that one day we'll realize that he was right, but only when it's too late. My son isn't speaking to me or my husband. I feel horrible about the whole situation and am starting to think I handled this the wrong way. I have been with my partner for 7 years. We initially met online, and after meeting in person a few times and realizing our affection for one another, we found it promising to move in together. I moved from California to Pennsylvania to be with him throughout graduate school. All was seemingly well during this time. I have never really had any reason to not trust him. I encouraged him to very much so, to try his best to make friends, or to explore hobbies on his own outside of the various ones we share, because I have my own passions. And I found we connected most when we met in the middle through conversations about these passions, through the act of explaining or showcasing what we've taken in or learned. Throughout these 7 years, he has struggled with very low self-esteem. And though I don't necessarily think of myself as the pillar of self-love, the depth of mine doesn't reach the low perception of his self-value. Because of this, he has seen and stopped seeing both a counselor and a therapist, and has been on medication to help for the last 6 months. Things were seemingly well between us, and continued to be pretty fluid. We continued to share things, and take long walks, and were pretty open-ended about where we stood in the relationship. If one was feeling a bit of an ebb, the other would pick up more of a share, and vice versa. However, things took a bit of a dip about 2 days ago when I felt the ebb, and asked him about it. Initially, he said there was really nothing wrong. And perhaps I was just feeling this way because with our schedules we haven't been able to see one another for long periods of time like we are used to, which is true. But the feeling continued to irk me, and when I asked about it a second time, he confessed to me. He had begun talking to another girl from another country via Instagram direct messages. And though things between she and him never crossed the boundaries of platonic friendship, he really loved the initial rush of someone asking him questions about his favorite movie, his favorite album, his favorite book. All things he and I already know very well about one another. I asked if he'd sent any selfies, or anything risque, and he said no, though I can't confirm, because he deleted the messages. A good deal of me believes him, because of how open he was about the initial conversations to begin with. We slept apart, and I just felt really confused the entire night. Because I couldn't really resonate with wanting that sort of attention from someone else. If anything, his yearning for that type of attention sort of hurt. It felt like I wasn't doing enough, or giving enough. The next morning, though I don't have an Instagram, and am not on the app, I went to check his using the desktop version, and found that posts where he once called me the love of his life, or a specific post with a gift I gave him that once said, "Greatest gift from the greatest girl," were still on his profile, but the words, "girlfriend," or "love of my life," were completed erased. With this realization, my confusion and hurt turned to very real heartache. I called him and asked if he had deleted these words from the specific posts, and with shame, he said yes, he did. When I asked why, he said it was because he just didn't want the attention from the girl asking him about himself to be disrupted if she found out he was in a long-term relationship. I guess this is where I asked the obvious and questioned why someone who is just asking about your favorite books, movies, etc., would be driven away by the fact that you have a girlfriend. And he said he didn't know why he did it, and that it was a massive mistake. At the risk of seeming toxic, and I will take full accountability for seeming so or being so, I asked him to please deactivate his Instagram for the time being while we sort through this, his Twitter as well. He did, and though I was feeling a bit of relief about that, I couldn't help but feel a bit saddened that he didn't choose to do that on his own for the benefit of our relationship. He had to wait for me to ask. Which again, just made me feel like such a toxic and controlling partner. Two things I always strive to be so far from. When he got home from work, we discussed everything at massive length, and he continued to swear up and down that these conversations pertained strictly to music, movies, and books, and he didn't have interest in her. Just interest in the initial rush of the attention he was receiving. We read a few articles, and he broke things down to me as his self-esteem has never been lower. Despite his career as a doctor being at a high, and his finances in order, he felt things with his music weren't taking off. And with that came a feeling that he wasn't special, and it was nice for someone to make him feel that way. I felt shame and asked him if I wasn't doing enough or giving enough to him to make him feel that way. He said, I defiantly was. But my love, and attention and affection, became a pillar he could rely on, and got used to, so with new attention came a rush. And he liked that. I asked him if he wanted to be single, and find that rush in dating new people. And he kept insisting that that's so far from what he wants. He wants to remain a couple, and do all he can to work on these things together. Though I can't help but correlate that feeling he enjoys with the feeling of a first date. Which hurts, of course. I told him I didn't really see how we could move past this because there was nothing much for me to make an attempt to work on moving forward. This seems to be a self-stemming problem that I emphasize with, but just don't want to be on the receiving end of the counter effects. So though it is incredibly uneasy to begin to think of how difficult it'll be to begin again, it is just as difficult to think about how difficult it would be to stay and try to rebuild back up an issue that I feel like just a bystander. When it comes to this has all been very painful, and if this comes to an end, I just want it to be as civil and as possible. He deserves to love himself, but not at the expense of the love we have between us. I deserve love that is stable and comforting, and not laced with newfound paranoia. Despite this all, my heart is still very much in this, of course, and he has been very vocal about how it was just one mistake. Nothing happened, we can work through this, etc. And I secretly keep hoping he will make a step, any step really, to showcase these words and implement action, seek a new therapist. Find the two of us a relationship counselor, buy a book on self-help or on how couple conquer affairs, anything at all. Without me having to be the one to ask him. I just want him to have that yearning that he continues to say he has, but instead of saying it, I was him to show me. That makes me irrational or just plain dumb. I believe to be in a state where I can handle either answer. Or something completely different just the same. Do all think I'm blowing something completely out of proportion? Given how this was an exchange of conversation between him and another girl for just a few days. And his erasure of me on his profile was only for about 2 days? This has been a first in this relationship, this has been a first in my life truthfully. I just felt completely vulnerable and isolated. My husband and I don't want kids. My mother-in-law is big into family in the traditional sense. She has been pushy with us about having kids since we got married. Literally the week after we got engaged, she started asking. My husband has always changed the subject, and has even told her that it's really none of her business. Every time we see her, she asks. Everything we do is built around the idea of us having kids. 3 years into our marriage, my husband said we might not even have kids and mother-in-law would not hear it. At year 4, husband had a vasectomy and I had a tubal. So this weekend we were all at their home enjoying some barbecue and drinks and everything. When I get up to grab a beer, my mother-in-law asks me if maybe I should drink water instead, because wink wink nudge nudge. You never know. I was annoyed by this and said, there's really no chance. Mil, all wide grin, said, oh come on. It's time for you two to finally get serious. Put down the beer and tell us when we can finally expect you two to finally make your family official. I said we've been official for about 5 years now, Mil, and drink the beer. Husband laughs with me. Mother-in-law gets more annoyed and says, you won't be real, last names, until you bless us with babies. Husband repeated. After about 15 minutes of the usual comments, I finally snapped and said, husband got snipped. I had my tubes tied. We're not having kids. You need to stop bringing it up. Period. Well, I thought I started WWII. She started crying and stormed off. Family looked at us with disgust and stormed off to comfort her. We left. Party kinda ended. The social media bullshit started shortly after. Vague posts, links about how motherhood is a woman's greatest calling, listicles about how unhappy childless women are, etc. Some meme about how I guess I wasn't a good enough mother and won't be graduating to grandmother. It's obnoxious to the point that I just muted all of them. My mother-in-law finally called me this morning and told me that she was willing to put this all behind us if husband and I came over, and listened to her reasons that we really need to have kids. I told her no, that we are tired of her pushing this on us, and then she said, you two aren't prepared to be real, last name S. I'd like a refund for what we paid for the wedding. It wasn't that much. It was like $400 for the rehearsal dinner. I hung up on her. When recounting this to my friends, a few of them said that I was the asshole here for dropping it like that. But I don't think she was ever going to drop it if I didn't finally make a serious, direct comment about it.